Every afternoon, as the golden light of the sun stretched lazily across the park, a little pug named Max would trot happily alongside his grandma. He was easy to spot with his tiny legs, curious snout, and the cozy blue scarf Grandma had knitted just for him. The scarf wasn't just cute, it was a piece of love he carried wherever he went. Max and Grandma had their routine down to perfection. Grandma would secure Max's tiny leash, gently tugging it as they made their way down the same winding path through the park. Max liked to think of himself as the explorer, sniffing every blade of grass, chasing every drifting leaf, and barking proudly at the squirrels that dared invade his territory. Their walks always ended at a wooden bench nestled beneath an old oak tree. Grandma would lower herself onto the seat with a sigh, and Max would hop up beside her, his tail wagging as if he'd just completed the most heroic adventure. Out came Grandma's sandwich, which she never ate alone. She'd break off tiny pieces for Max, smiling as he eagerly gobbled them up. Together they'd watch the sun sink behind the trees, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange. It felt, in that moment, like time stood still. Max loved these evenings. For him, the walks weren't just about fresh air or chasing leaves. They were about being with her. Grandma always talked to him during their strolls. Sometimes she shared stories of her younger days. Sometimes she hummed little tunes. It didn't matter that Max didn't understand every word. What mattered was the sound of her voice, so gentle and familiar, his world in every sense. One evening, though, something was different. Grandma coughed more than usual. Her words came slower, and her footsteps dragged. Max noticed everything, how she leaned heavier on her cane, how her breath seemed shorter, how she paused longer under the big oak tree before they reached their bench. But when she settled onto the bench, she still smiled down at Max, her fingers stroking the space on his head where his little ears flopped down. "Tomorrow, we'll walk longer, my boy," she whispered with a small laugh, pressing her lips softly to the top of his head. Max tilted his face up at her, wide-eyed and content, not suspecting for a moment that anything could be amiss. The next day, as usual, Max's routine began. He sat by the door, tail wagging, blue scarf tied neatly around his neck. He barked once, just to let Grandma know he was ready for their adventure. Her leash, the tiny one with yellow flowers on it, sat next to him. He waited, but the door never opened. Grandma never came. At first, Max didn't understand. Maybe she forgot, maybe she was late. His tail wagged slower, then stopped altogether. He barked again, just to remind her, but the door stayed shut. Confused, Max pawed lightly at the door, tilting his head with a soft whining noise, the kind he always made when he wanted her attention. Still, no one came. Days turned into weeks. And still, every afternoon, before the sun began its descent, Max would put on the blue scarf Grandma had knitted for him and sit by the door. He didn't understand the whispers he heard from other humans in the house. Words like hospital and resting and gone. Those words didn't mean anything to Max. All he knew was that their walks had stopped, and the emptiness stretched longer with each passing day. But Max was a brave little pug, and pugs, especially ones in blue scarves, don't give up on the people they love. When it became clear that no one else would take Grandma's place at the door, he decided it was up to him to keep their routine alive. So, one quiet evening, as the sun dipped low and the air turned golden, Max picked himself up from his waiting spot. He nosed the door open, a door his grandma had always opened for him, and stepped outside. With his scarf tied snugly, Max padded down the familiar path to the park. His legs instinctively carried him along the trail he and Grandma had walked so many times before. His little nose twitched with excitement, sniffing the scents he remembered so well. He paused under the big oak tree, glancing around, almost as if expecting to see her cane resting against the bench. When he climbed onto the bench, his tiny body settling into the same space beside her usual spot, Max sat quietly, his head tilted toward the horizon. The sandwich was missing. The comforting sound of Grandma's humming wasn't there, but the colors of the sunset were still beautiful. Max liked to think that maybe Grandma was watching the sunset too, just from somewhere else. Each day after that, Max continued their ritual. He retraced every step of their walk, from the door to the trail to the big oak tree. Some days, other people at the park stopped and watched him. A little pug with a blue scarf, walking seemingly on his own, was quite the sight to see. A kind lady even once tried to feed him a piece of her sandwich, but Max politely turned his nose away. Not because he wasn't hungry, but because those moments belonged to Grandma. Back at the house, Max stuck close to her favorite spots. Her chair, her favorite corner where her knitting basket sat untouched, the cozy blanket she used to drape over her lap in the afternoons. On some evenings, the golden rays of the setting sun spilled through the window, lighting up the chair like it was glowing. Max would curl up right beside it, his small scarfed body warmed by the sunlight, as if Grandma had somehow sent the light just to comfort him. And while Grandma never returned through that door, Max kept a piece of her alive in the only way he knew how, by holding on to their walks, their rituals, and the simple joy of a sunset. Each scarfed step he took was a quiet promise to never forget, to keep carrying her love wherever his little paws led him. Because for Max, love didn't end when the walk stopped. Love meant waiting. Love meant remembering. Love meant carrying on the journey, one little pug step at a time, with the spirit of Grandma holding his tiny leash as they wandered together forever, if only in his heart.